As NFL fans, we've come to get excited about the trade deadline. For contending teams, it's an opportunity to bolster your roster and make a run at a championship. However, this isn't just for the winners, as even the rebuilding rosters can ship off aging talent to prepare themselves for the future ahead. As I reminisce on what I love about the deadline, I thought it'd be a great idea to get into 3 terrible deals that occurred right before the deadline. The first one that I want to talk about here is from 2017, when the Carolina Panthers traded wide receiver Kelvin Benjamin to the Buffalo Bills. Carolina was able to get a 3rd and 7th round pick in return for his services, picks that turned out to become cornerback Rashawn Golden and inside linebacker Andre Smith. Golden spent just 1 season with the Panthers before being released, and Smith spent about 2 seasons in a backup role before also being released. Now, with all of that being said, you'd think that the Panthers would be the losers of this deal, but they are not, despite Benjamin being a former first-round draft pick in 2014. When the Panthers drafted him, he broke 1,000 receiving yards in his rookie campaign and 9 touchdowns to go along with it, but he later tore his ACL in training camp during that offseason and missed the entire 2015 season. When he came back in 2016, he was noticeably different on the field, resulting in a significant drop in his production. When 2017 came around and the Panthers noticed that he was on pace for a similarly disappointing season as the one before, they shipped him to Buffalo to at least get something out of it. Buffalo had just traded Sammy Watkins 2 months before this trade happened, so they were in dire need of help at the wideout position. After being shipped to Buffalo, Benjamin played in about 6 games before tearing his meniscus, ending his entire year with the Bills. In those 6 games, he had 16 catches for 217 yards and 1 touchdown. Nothing crazy, really. When he got back onto the field, he tweaked his knee, and it resulted in even more missed time for the Bills. Eventually, he did return and played 12 games for his new squad. In those 12 games, the following season, he caught 23 passes on 62 targets for 354 yards and a touchdown. Just 1. And in case you missed it the first time, I'm going to repeat this. He had 23 catches on 62 targets. That is a 35% catch percentage. The absolute worst in the league that entire season. Which is pretty insane when you think about it. By the end of that season, Buffalo had actually made a playoff game, and during their wildcard matchup with Jacksonville Jaguars, Benjamin had just 1 catch for 9 yards. And, well, Buffalo did not need to see much more of him after that performance. So they cut him almost immediately after the season. The next deadline deal that I have on the list came in 1974 between the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams had a 33-year-old John Hadl as their quarterback at the time, and I hope I pronounced his name right. He was fresh off his 6th Pro Bowl appearance and just got named as a first-team All-Pro. He even finished 2nd in MVP voting that year behind the infamous O.J. Simpson. All of this was accomplished in his first year with the team, right after he had spent 11 years with the San Diego Chargers. Unfortunately for him, it wouldn't be the last time he was sent around the league. He started half the season for the Rams the following year, but eventually got traded for a guy named James Harris. And if you don't recognize that name, then I should be the one to tell you that Harris later became the first African-American quarterback to start a playoff game that exact same year. But, getting back to the topic at hand, with the benching of Hadl, Green Bay thought it would be their chance to swoop in and steal him. And by steal, I mean they severely overpaid for a guy who was no longer starting games. They handed the Rams 5 draft picks, 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, and a third-rounder. The compensation is a little less crazy when you hear that the Packers originally wanted to trade for the New Orleans Saints quarterback Archie Manning, but that deal fell through, forcing them to pivot to Hadl. Still, the investment was immense. The results weren't immediate for him either. They never actually came. Hadl spent just under 2 full seasons with the Packers as a starting quarterback, and I genuinely don't know if it could have gone worse. He led the team to a 7-12 record across 19 games, but his stats were what made them unbearable. He had thrown 9 touchdowns across this stretch, compared to a whopping 29 interceptions. I mean, seriously, it was like Green Bay cursed this man the second he stepped onto the field. He lost all of his arm talent. This was a guy who finished 2nd in MVP voting just 2 years before. A guy who had 6 Pro Bowl nods. A guy who had an All-Pro first-team selection. And yet, it didn't stop him from throwing about 1.5 interceptions per game as a Packer. And again, the Packers surrendered 5 early draft picks to get this deal to happen. The Rams, of course, cashed in. They went on to win 6 consecutive NFC West division titles and even made a Super Bowl appearance thanks to key contributions to players who were drafted with those selections from the Hadl trade. Among the most notable were cornerbacks Monty Jackson and Pat Thomas, both of whom were second-round draft picks who each earned multiple Pro Bowl selections with the franchise. It's honestly wild to think that the Packers essentially traded 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and a third just to get Jameis Winston, but without all of the explosive arm talent that came with his 30 interceptions. All they got was the turnovers. I'd be sick to my stomach if I was the one that pulled the trigger on this deal. Finally, I wanted to end the video on a recent deal that might have slipped your mind. That was the trade between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Chicago Bears, a deal sending wide receiver Chase Claypool to Chicago in exchange for a second-round pick. Claypool was drafted by the Steelers late in the second round in 2020. He was a big-bodied wideout that could come down with jump balls, or at least that's what Pittsburgh had in mind for him. In his rookie season, he had 62 receptions for 873 yards and 9 touchdowns, making him look like a good choice for that draft selection. He continued to be an impact player the following season, but his role didn't exactly expand. It stayed pretty similar, catching 3 fewer passes on 4 fewer targets for 13 fewer yards compared to the previous season. I mean, his production was almost identical. The only major difference was that he scored only 2 touchdowns compared to the 9 in his rookie season. By 2022, the Steelers were replacing him in the offense, and by the deadline, he got traded to Chicago. He had only caught 32 passes for 311 yards and 1 touchdown at the time, so the fact that Pittsburgh got a second rounder for his services is pretty mind-blowing. Then again, Chicago was desperate, and they were forced to compete with the Green Bay Packers, who also offered a second-round draft pick. But at the end of the day, Chicago got what they wanted, and acquired Chase Claypool. Now, this team was once again struggling offensively, and found themselves at 3-5 at the deadline following a loss to the Dallas Cowboys. They needed help in their passing offense, and thought Claypool could wind up being a future starter for years to come in this league. Since getting traded to the Bears, Claypool failed to play a full season. The same year he got traded, he caught 14 passes for 140 scoreless yards. The following year, he played 3 games for Chicago and caught only 4 passes for 51 yards and 1 touchdown. That was really it, his entire production list over at the Chicago Bears before leaving. But I'm afraid it wasn't just his negative production that hurt the Bears. It was also his attitude. Claypool was openly frustrated and downright miserable on the sidelines at numerous different points of the season, and there's no doubt that it could have been an infectious type of mindset to a locker room that was already struggling to deal with losses. It ultimately reached a boiling point when Claypool went to the media and discussed his frustration openly to the public about his role in the offense. To make matters worse, the Bears literally lost every single game in 2022 after making the trade for Claypool. I swear, the Bears traded for the human version of a rain cloud. Meanwhile, it was all sunshine and rainbows for Pittsburgh, who got rid of a guy who caused drama in the locker room, who didn't improve in his first 3 years in the league, and who got a second-round draft pick for him in the process. Oh, and speaking of that second-round draft pick, that wound up being used on cornerback Joey Porter Jr., the son of another Pittsburgh legend you might know. Porter Jr. was 5th in Defensive Rookie of the Year voting in his rookie season, and is still one of their best secondary players to this day. Claypool, on the other hand, is essentially out of the league. So yeah, there was a pretty clear winner here. With all of that being said, that does it for this video on 3 terrible trades that you might have forgotten about. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed it, leave a comment below if you remember any of these deals happening, and ring that notification bell to catch more of my uploads. I'll see you all in the next one. See ya.